You're listening to Sunday Service, a live stream of the Grad School Confessional podcast, where we rant about the inner workings of the ivory tower of academia in a mildly qualified way. I'm your host, Dr. Yoasway, and I'm joined by my co-host, Anasway. Today, we're discussing the quantified academic. So, what do I mean by the quantified academic? Well, essentially, as an academic, we are subject to a lot of different metrics, a lot of different ways in which we can quantify our productivity, our success, our output. And because of this, we kind of have shaped the way that academia and research is done around these metrics and kind of distorted it around it. And so today I want to talk about a lot of different things, but I guess one thing that we can kind of obviously start with is perhaps the metric of productivity that we most often use, which is publications and the number of publications.
Sorry, I have a dog just asleep on my foot right now. we need the dog cam.
Yeah, we really do need the dog cam. Yeah.
Oh my god. I don't want to publish anymore. That's where I'm coming at it.
No?
Okay, so I feel like the number keeps going up every year and it varies by field, right? Because you have like humanities that are publishing books, I think. I don't know. And then you have like us in health sciences that are publishing articles, but I feel like the number is going up every year. One of my girlfriends was saying how her supervisor was actually up for tenure, and she was basically up for tenure with the number of publications after working for the university for 3 years, with the same number of publications as somebody who already had tenure and had been working for the institution for like 15 years. And so like you're basically expected to meet a 15-year-old threshold of publications within 3 years if you want tenure. And I think that is ridiculous.
And I totally agree. Like this idea that we're slowly, not even slowly, I feel like in the last decade, we've just accelerated the amount of publications that you need to, attain the similar position.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, right? Like we have one friend who recently got a position, like I think 5 years ago, right? 5 or 6 years ago as an assistant prof. And, they had, I think they said like 19 publications or something like that, like to get their position. And that was after a year of postdocing, and then I'm, looking into these positions now too. And that's about right, like 19 to 20. We're talking like at least double digits, probably, I wouldn't be surprised if it was going to be over 20 now. And I think part of the reason, that it's becoming so much higher is a result of two things, right? It's kind of like economics in a way. It's like supply and demand. You have this, increase in the number of people who are doing higher education, completing higher education. So, masters, PhDs, postdocs. But at the same time, universities aren't at a capacity to be able to take on multiple assistant professors, particularly when, the research that they're doing is oftentimes either redundant or it overlaps, or, maybe it just isn't really as, lucrative in terms of getting grants and stuff, which is a whole other thing too. But I think because of that, we have a lot of almost, what's the word I'm looking for? Like fabricated competition, or just like competition. Artificial competition, yeah. I suppose. Yeah, in a way. And so we're just kind of forced to compete with each other. And the way that we do that best is through this arbitrary sort of metric of publications, right? It's like, don't even worry about what's actually in the paper itself. The mere fact that you have more of these things than somebody else is a sign, right? It's like, oh, you must be more productive, or you must be doing more.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And for sure, like, nobody's going to read those papers.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Like a hiring committee, if you have someone who's got like 20 publications and then you have another person who's got like, 15 publications, you're not going to be like, well, let's assess the quality of each publication. It's like, what does it go? And bring this into another metric. Oh, what journal was it published in? How many times was it cited, right?
Yes. Well, that's another thing, right? Like we have journal metrics, we have journal impact factors, and I think it's ridiculous because you have something like Nature, you have something like The Lancet, and humanities, sociologists, even health sociologists, they're not publishing in those journals because they're not basic sciences. And so, our journals, the Journal of Medicine and Society, or yeah, Journal of Medicine and Society, it peaks at 16. Like, that is
Hmm.
our top journal. It has an impact factor of 16 compared to Nature, which is like, what, a bajillion?
It's definitely high for sure. And like there's this idea of like a luxury or almost like a celebrity journal almost, right? Like they're really
Yeah.
just publishing these really remarkable findings and whatnot.
But it's not. If you actually go through and you start reading it, you're like, half of the trying really hard not to swear. It's so hard. Um, Half of the things that are getting published there, they're getting published because something similar was found by a different lab that just didn't have the money to publish in Nature.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's definitely like exclusive in that way. It's very limiting, you know. It's exclusive to people who obviously can't afford it. I think the entire system of, quantifying an academic kind of begets more quantification, right? Like more reliance on it. So, for example, if you're getting in grants, right, you now have the money to run more studies, to publish in these higher impact journals, which then demonstrates to the university that you are successful, that you can consistently bring in this kind of stuff. And then that's going to get you, to tenure faster. That's going to get you more students. That's going to get you better opportunities. And so, in a way, productivity and these metrics beget themselves.
Yeah, the rich get richer. And my new favorite thing is like social media engagement. Um, it's like,
What don't you like about it?
sorry?
What don't you like about it?
Okay, first of all, I'm a millennial. I grew up without technology being ever pervasive. And so as I grew up, I learned 3 or 4 platforms and I was like, this is good.
Yeah.
Um, and then now I have to learn more and more platforms. And I mean, I don't think Twitter is new by any means
Hmm.
anymore. But more so in academia now, you have to have a Twitter following. You have to be engaging with quote unquote the public on Twitter.
Hmm.
And like, that's a terrible idea. That is an awful
What's
idea.
that?
Whoever, like, on a hiring committee at some point decided, okay, because what happens on Twitter is that, like, you can tweet at people and you can tweet like generally within your bubble or your community,
Sure.
but it will get picked up by a stream of people who are not part of that community. So regardless of how nuanced you were being in what's the threshold now? 200 characters?
I don't even know actually. 200, 250?
200.
Whatever it is. Whatever it is.
I'm an elder millennial. It'll get picked up. It'll get misinterpreted. And universities are like, here, go do
Yeah.
this, engage with the public. Whatever you tweet, if it falls flat or, God forbid, it stirs some controversy,
Yeah.
we're going to abandon you without a life vest. But, keep doing it. And if you're successful and you have like, for academics, I think like 11,000, 15,000 followers is like,
Holy, what? That's
yeah,
successful? I thought like, dude, most academics that I follow have like less than 500 followers.
yeah, yeah, but they're not.
Okay, okay.
They're not. They're
Well,
not.
they're like reputable in their field, and I think that's the difference, right? Like, I
Oh, for
think
sure.
the point that you're trying to draw here is that success and productivity on social media is not representative of like success as an academic. But what we've done is we've just decided to kind of add on this metric as like you might as well throw this on too, because we have this general idea that social media engagement is important, right? Insofar as it can be used as a tool for dissemination or as a tool for engaging with the public and
Yeah, but
access
like
like that. But
generally, in
yeah, yeah,
theory.
yeah, exactly. But in practice, it doesn't, right? Like in practice, social media can be used in any number of ways, let alone like just giving your crap opinion of just like what something is,
And
right?
and so many academics do.
Yeah, yeah,
And so many
definitely.
academics do. But I think it's ridiculous because now you're like, you have this other thing that you need to do, and there's there's so much research by the same people who are on Twitter to show what a cesspool Twitter is.
Yeah.
And Yet universities are like, you know how social media is terrible for your mental health? We want you to be on it. That's like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
imagine with anything else. Imagine if you were an academic and you were in a lab that was like smoking.
Sorry, dogs are fighting. Dudley.
The joys of live streaming from a room with two medium-sized dogs. Anyway, imagine you're in a room studying smoking cessation
Mm-hmm.
or like consequences of smoking, and you found that smoking causes lung cancer, and your university's like, yeah, but to keep your job, we want you to keep smoking 1 pack a day.
Yeah.
You're like, I feel like you're
Yeah.
misinterpreting a lot of things.
Yeah. But there's a difference between like the intention that we have for people to use something the way we want them to, and then how they actually use it. But I think it also is reflective of how we treat every other metric for an academic, right? It's that we don't actually care about the work that goes into it. We don't actually care about the specifics of that thing. At the end of the day, it's a number, and it's a number that we can use to compare you to other people, right? The number of followers you have, the number of like, I think it's called an impact that your tweet garners, right? And so,
What?
yeah, and you don't know this on your Twitter. You can like go and see like how many people have actually like looked and stopped on your tweet without actually.
I am an elder millennial. I
Oh
don't
man,
know.
okay.
I don't know. I'm not a technophobe. I'm just
I hope not. You're literally every podcast where like you do digital health research.
I know, but I cannot be ours.
Oh my god.
It's another thing, right? Because as an academic, you're like, you got to supervise students,
Mm-hmm.
you got to run research, you got to apply for grants, you have to manage your 2 dogs. And then now on top of that, you have to run a successful social media page. Come on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm already paying my own salary, basically.
Yeah, basically.
So what else? What else do you want from us?
Mm-hmm. And like it also feeds into this idea that, the time that is needed to devote into these things, like you don't need to have a social media presence. It's not part of your job, but it is one of those things where if you're not putting in time, certainly not with your paid time, let's be real, you're not getting paid to be on social media, but the time that you are spending in your free time should be put towards, building your engagement, building your social media following, making sure you're blah, blah, right? And like, I don't want to just focus on social media because, there's obviously a lot of other things as well. I feel like most of the metrics that we use, right, are products of work that is not necessarily part of our job description or extends beyond just like the 40 hours that most people would have for a full-time job, right? Like
40 hours.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like you're basically working all the time because you're thinking about your work all the time, right? And then because of that, you're doing it because you need to get these metrics. You need to be thinking about the next project. Like even now, I would say this is probably like a slower period of time within like my own research program where like I don't have as much of my own stuff going on. And even then I'm still like, I have this like looming anxiety about I need to have the next project or next 3 projects ready to go, or at least in the works so that I can continue this train of productivity. I don't slow down, because momentum is also so much more difficult to maintain here.
And this is what irritates me so much. It's like we corporatized the university.
Mm-hmm.
We made it into a business, and we try to sell like this vision to people coming into academia that it's not a business, but it is. And like you're not the one making money off of it, right?
Yeah.
And all of these metrics, all of it is like, it's completely arbitrary.
Right.
It's completely arbitrary. And, universities use the metrics to justify. It's like, well, we want you to be doing research that's being used, right?
Yeah, like at its core, I don't think that it's a bad, like I don't think there's ill intention behind it, right? Like you obviously want people who are doing good research, whatever that means. And you obviously want people who are making an impact with their research and that it's being used. And because like, how else are you going to justify to like undergrads and parents of like students that, hey, come to our university, we have this like groundbreaking research that's happening. And so I feel like because of this idea of, okay, well, we need these things to happen. We want good research. We want good academics, but we don't know how to actually go into these specific niche fields and be like, oh yeah, but this is what would be good. This is what looks good. This is what's being taken up. It's like, no, we need just like to distill everything about you into a series of numbers or a number, and that's what's going to be
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah, but then what happens is you have people who want to get hired, and so they start splicing their findings, right?
Yeah.
They start trying to distill all of their research to what is the smallest publishable unit. And who is that helping? That's not helping anybody.
Yeah. It's not necessarily good science. It's not necessarily
Yeah.
like, and also I think what it leads to is this very safe, very like gradual difference or change in research, right? It's like, oh, well, this thing is just only slightly different than the last thing.
Yeah. And so, for example, for sociology, and I speak from that background because that's what I'm engaged in the most, sociology is kind of having a little bit of a crisis right now because what's happening is it's moving forward so fast. People are putting forth theories and frameworks and whatever else as fast as they can, and nobody has the time to have a broader theory and to kind of sit in it and percolate and write something that is super meaningful. So you have social theories that are getting put forth and then not being used or being overshadowed by new ones, like on a monthly basis.
Right.
And if you're a sociologist and you want to do research in the field and you want to write, like, you're not catching up. I get tremendous anxiety just like with Soch Twitter and Techno Soch Twitter, seeing the bulk of literature that is coming out. You can't catch up.
Yeah. And I think like to that exact sentiment, if you're putting out all of this research, and this research is barely different than the last research, but it's all coming out, it's all new stuff that you need to catch up on, read. Like, who has the time now to like read all of that stuff, right? And to be able to like understand where the field is at, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying don't read papers, don't try and understand what your field is.
That's the message. Don't read papers.
Don't read papers.
Don't go further than the
abstract.
abstract.
I never read papers. All you need is the abstract, man. That's what I've learned.
You're okay.
Yeah. But like outside of that, it's so hard to be able to stay up to date with everything because everyone keeps on putting out something else that's like kind of different, right?
Not really. And then sometimes you read things and you're like, did this need to go out? Like, did this need to publish? I feel like that about a lot of my own work, not because I think it's bad work, but because I'm like, is this just further saturating the field or is it actually pushing the field forward?
Yeah, like, am I doing this research because I like this research, or am I doing this research because like there's like it looked like it was kind of convenient? I could have like done this. I thought there was a gap here, albeit like a very small one, and it's just kind of like, yeah, I'll just write this paper, do this research, and put it out. And I do feel that way about a lot of other aspects too, like not just papers, right? Like when you think even now about, it's not just about writing the paper and doing the research, it's also just about being on papers.
Yeah.
Like I think it breeds this culture of I need to be involved in as many things as I can, but to like the smallest quantifiable degree. Like, what is the role of a fourth or fifth author on a paper? Like at that point,
I brewed
if they're not
coffee.
the last author. Yeah, like kind of, right? I was in the room and I like knew enough about the project.
Yeah. And then what that does is fundamentally you're like, oh, this person is on other people's papers. They're collaborating. You're like, what is the value of that collaboration?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What are we doing to the word collaboration when collaboration entails I looked over a draft?
Yeah.
I'm not saying you shouldn't like be helping people out and editing their work, but does that warrant authorship?
Yeah, no, exactly. Like you're putting in this work and you're being like, okay, as first author, I am, let's be real, doing the entire project more or less, right?
You're the driving force.
Yeah, exactly. And then you got your last author who's like, supervising everything and whatever. And like, we joke about that, right? Last author is just there to put their
Who
name on things.
signs off on the ethics?
But then, like what warrants authorship sometimes? Like sometimes you have someone do your stats for you and they're like, okay, well, I'm only going to do your stats for you if I'm on this paper. And like, okay, fine. You're not getting paid for it, I suppose.
Mhm.
But there's standards for authorship that some organizations have put out, right? And
Yeah.
like as a rule of thumb, one thing I've heard is if the paper would not be in the form that it is,
Mhm.
right, and the form that it gets published in without your help, right, then you deserve authorship, right? Because that has been informed by what you like directly have put in. But like just looking over a paper, and I'm guilty of this too, like just looking over a paper, editing it, like I don't think that warrants authorship, you know? Like that's
Yeah.
what reviewers do, and reviewers aren't going to get
I
authorship.
was literally just going to say that. I'm like, I should be on so many other people's papers.
Right? Like in that definition, by the way, reviewers should definitely be on these papers because they're making these papers better, or presumably,
Or worse.
or worse, whatever. But yeah, and one of the things too, I think, is we don't standardize the reporting of, who does what necessarily. Like some journals do this.
Some journals are starting to, yeah.
Yeah, right. You have like these guidelines, like, okay, so who did what about the research, and so, that's better. But who puts that in their CV? Like, do you write on your CV, oh, I was third author, but I did all of this stuff for this project? Like, no.
And fundamentally, I don't think anyone hiring me for a job is going to care.
Yeah. It's just like, where you want it, Yeah. That's like, how many first authors did you have? And how many other, like, just general publications do you have? And then, too, like, you get into the idea of, like, okay, well, then there's also so many, like, you got into the whole splicing of your data thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also, like, okay, well, what other kinds of publications can I get, right? What is the smallest unit of a publication?
Okay. In terms of that, I literally, and this is when like COVID was peak COVID.
Classic COVID.
I saw a commentary that came out, that was, I kid you not, probably 800 words, and it had 12 authors on it.
Wow.
I was like, did all of you, was this like, have you ever done that activity in camp where you have to write a story?
Say one word.
I'm like, did each of you contribute a single word? And I mean, all of these people are rightfully experts in their own kind of thing, but
yeah, but like, what does he really, do you really deserve it? Yeah, I totally get that.
12 authors. Seriously, what kind of Mad Libs commentary is this?
Everyone contributed like one idea, and then the one per first author is just like, I gotta put it all together.
I'm pretty sure everybody's contribution except the first authors was, yeah, you can put me on this paper. That was the extent.
And then the favorite is just like, yeah, I paid for this study. Put me on the paper, I paid for it.
Like, okay, being a sugar daddy does not warrant authorship. That's gonna be a quote if I ever have a lab.
Yeah.
It's just like, being a sugar daddy does not warrant authorship. I will have it framed above my office door. Sugar mama.
No, I get you. Sugar person.
Sugar person.
That just sounds strange. It just sounds like a diabetic. Yeah. But so I think we've raised like a lot of good points about it. Like social media, for one, is kind of this like auxiliary and totally, what's the opposite of mandatory? Optional, yeah. A totally not mandatory, optional thing. But then, obviously impacts your hiring, obviously impacts your reputation. And then you get into publications, which is like kind of our bread and butter. And one of the things that I dislike so much about this system is that it like leverages academics for these metrics, right? Like you want these things. Even if you don't want a social media following, if you don't want to be involved in social media, you kind of have to be.
You kind of have to. Yeah. And this was just a idea that I had. When you engage in genuine knowledge translation, that, and again, this will kind of come down to metrics, but when you go ahead and you publish blog posts and things like that, like you have published with an online, I would say they're a blog, called The Conversation, and your articles have gone over 100,000 reads. And like, I don't know, how do you weigh that against somebody who has 11,000 followers for whatever reason. And once a month, they're just like, hey, I published this paper in this journal.
Yeah. Right. And like, obviously there's a lot of research out there that kind of tries to demonstrate the difference between knowledge dissemination versus knowledge translation and knowledge utilization and mobilization and, all of these different zations, right, of knowledge.
Yeah.
But you're totally right in that we have a difficulty in also understanding the impact of our research, right?
Yeah.
The impact of our research traditionally is just what? Citations, right? Like how many other people have read your paper and were like, you know what? I took something from this and I'm going to write another paper myself and I'm going to mention your paper in it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the original shout out, right? Like research shout out.
The academic shout out. But I freaking hate that. I have 10 other people in my field. Not fair.
Yeah. And like, it's not a fair metric in the sense that, not every field is going to be as, I suppose, broadly applicable.
Yeah.
Right. And then also too, it depends on like what sort of aspect of your field you're in, right? Like if you're doing even health research, right?
Yeah.
My work, which does like, these large scale interventions or is looking at these like, psychological effects, it's very like grounded theory stuff, right? Like, oh, this leads to this causes this, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Right? That stuff is way more likely to be cited than some like really complex or overarching social theory, even if that social theory has a lot of like value to it, right?
Yeah. Or if it's critical, in which point people are just like,
we just don't like critical research.
I don't like it. Nobody hates critical research like other critical researchers. Damn critical researchers ruining critical research.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. And so, not only that, so because citations are, the metric by which we're like, okay, that's the impact of your research, it becomes increasingly important for academics to publish in these journals that almost like promise a certain number of citations, right?
Which
the
is
impact factor.
Also like a lie.
Yeah.
We published in a journal that has 15 impact factor?
What?
Or what?
Wait, we did?
Technology and Society.
Oh, dude, no, not even close to 15.
Okay,
That's
like
5. Yeah.
Okay, 5. But like nobody has cited our thing. Mostly because we basically said an entire field doesn't exist. Or should seriously repivot the way it's measuring things.
Yeah, for sure. But you know what? I did get, some stuff has come out of that, right? Like we did write that one conversation article about it.
But again, right? Like,
yeah, I got like 15,000 views or something.
Yeah,
reads.
and I have people requesting the full manuscript all the time.
Yeah.
So people are reading it. They just don't want to sign.
Do you give them the manuscript though?
Huh?
Yeah, give them the manuscript.
Yeah. Of course I do.
That's knowledge disseminate. That's like knowledge translation. You're sharing it.
I am. Sharing is caring. No, I hate the fact that I have to like repeatedly year after year like go to my university and be like, was this enough? And the thing is like nobody will tell you the exact number.
Oh yeah, no.
Especially with hiring committees, everyone's like, it's about fit. It's about fit. And you're like, what the hell is fit? Right?
Does your CV fit into this square of length?
Yeah, exactly. Right? And you're like, yeah, maybe it's about fit, but the first step is the number of citations.
Yeah.
And, not citations, publications.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, it's like, did you go to this university and do you know somebody on the hiring committee? In which case the threshold is way lower.
Yeah.
But it's not like people are openly posting this. Like this year, for people who got tenure track positions in health sciences, the average number of publications was this.
Yeah.
That would be super helpful because I came across a paper that said on average across health sciences or life sciences, I think it was life sciences, across life sciences for people to get a tenure track position, they had 4.5 publications. And I read that and I said, that's bullshit. No, they didn't.
Yeah, right.
No, they did not. And it was from it was outdated. It's probably like 2011 or 2012 paper.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, it just goes to show you, if anything, how things have like exponentially accelerated.
But there has to
Right.
be a ceiling, right? There has
Yeah.
to be a ceiling.
And well, I mean, it's a really good point that you raised too that I just want to touch back on is that there's no transparency to this kind of thing. And I think the reason there's no transparency is also because it's entirely arbitrary, right? Like you can't have a standard for something that doesn't have a standard, like inherently has, like, how are you going to justify that? Oh yeah, 20 publications. Why? I don't know. It's a nice round number. Like we were just feeling that this year, right?
Like, you know what this feels like? It's imagine the Olympics when they do like the high jump.
Yeah.
They were blindfolded all the way until, like, you don't know. You might come up and the
Yeah.
bar is at 2.5 meters and you're like, all right, that's a warm up. Like, that's a.
Wait, I thought 2.5 meters was like incredibly high.
I don't know how this works.
Why did you pick an event that you knew?
Okay, pole vaulting.
Do you know heights for pole vaulting?
No. Anyway, point is, imagine the height of the bar was set completely arbitrarily. Like, you didn't know. You would
Yeah.
turn around and you're like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And somebody else would come up and be like, that's reasonable.
Okay, so what you're really saying is more like the height of the bar is like unknown, but you're just competing with like athletes who are of varying competency. Like you're pole vaulting next to an Olympian, next to like.
Dude, I don't know.
Where's this analogy going?
This analogy got away from me. I am sick and tired of universities telling me that I need to publish more when they're not creating an environment where I can publish more. And also, I don't want to.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's like it just goes back to for what? You know, all of this for what? For money, I guess.
Whose?
Well, I mean, if you
Not
get grant,
mine.
if you get grant money, the university's like, all right, well, that's great, right? Like,
Okay, but the thing is, like, if I got, and this is how easily motivated I am. If I got like $250 for each paper I published, just a little treat. Like,
that wouldn't even be sustainable, though.
Dude, I don't even care. Just give me some.
No, I mean for you to like live on $250 for a manuscript. Like, how long do you have to work on those things for?
And that's the thing. I don't need it to be sustainable, but just reward it. Other than like, okay, I published this thing. Now what?
I guess. I mean, do you feel like part of that is also the culture trying to be like, it's not about like trying to almost take away the joy of getting a publication because it's like downplaying how much it's really worth, and so that way you have to like keep doing more. Let me use another analogy that I hope is better than your pole vault one. So like, it's like if you got a piece of candy and you're like, oh wow, this is such a nice treat, a little piece of candy, but everyone else was like, oh, like that's just a piece of candy. Like what you actually want is you want like a handful of candy. Yeah, like it's cool that you got one piece of candy, but you want a handful, and you're like, I thought this was a nice thing, but I guess people are telling me that like I need way more. So I'm just going to keep like working for the pieces of candy. And then it makes each piece of candy worth that much less because you're like, there's another one's nice and now I have like 3 or 4, but people keep telling me that I need like 18. And so, you know, I can't be happy about this yet.
And also if I don't get 18 pieces of candy, I'm going to get fired.
You're not fired. Your contract expires.
It's fired. That's a soft way of saying you're fired. No,
Yeah.
I think I want to see what happens when we hit the ceiling. There has to be.
Mhm.
We can't keep ramping up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because, and I mean, during this pandemic, it sucks, but the people who benefited the most, and there were people who actually benefited in terms of their productivity from the pandemic, were people who didn't have family or childcare responsibilities. They were people who could pivot their research and didn't have to work with actual participants and could do things like digital health. Me.
Yeah, I think that's such.
And the
Go
fact
ahead.
that some people benefited from the pandemic and universities were like happy about that.
Yeah.
They're like, half of you are completely burnt out and on the verge of just full shutdown.
Yeah.
But a small percentage of you seem to have risen to the top. You're like, why is every day the Hunger Games?
Like, okay, first of all, it's like universities aren't explicitly saying, hey, you know, you need to do work during the pandemic. You know, there's a very much this like, attitude that's being put out of like, we need to be taking care of ourselves, or our faculty, the health and mental health of our faculty are like top priority, whatever, blah blah blah. But then at the same time, it's like you're kind of sending a mixed message when you're like, but also we have these COVID research grants that if you happen to be doing research during COVID and it's related to COVID, come on down. Like we'll give you X number of dollars just to keep doing research.
Yeah.
And it's like, this feels a bit.
And remember, your evaluations are happening at the end of the year. So if you didn't get one of those coveted COVID grants, your contract is not getting renewed.
Yeah.
Which means you're fired.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I don't know. I think COVID has been, I think this stuff is really much more salient for me because of COVID, because of the fact that like in a time where the world is more or less on fire, academia has not slowed down. And in fact, academia has instead pressed on the gas. They've doubled down and been like academics, this isn't a global pandemic. This is an opportunity. This is a research opportunity.
It's the most perverse like iteration of look at the silver lining.
Yeah, really though, really. It's not just look at the silver lining. It's like if you will follow the silver lining or you will not have a job.
Publish the silver lining.
Yeah. And I hate that we, through burning ourselves out basically through the pandemic, we have put ourselves in a position where we are now favorably viewed by this system, right?
Yeah.
Like if we did not get out the publications that we have over the pandemic and worked really hard and spent a lot of time just at home, like losing our minds in a way, then we wouldn't be in a position to have a lot of these different job opportunities, right? And also I say job opportunities as if they're just like everywhere. Like I'm very fortunate, or we're very fortunate to feel like we have the opportunities we have right now, right?
Yeah.
And so, it feels very like, how do we change a system, that's seems like irreparable at this point?
Just throw out the whole system and make a new one. At this point, it's like that one time I was trying to make sourdough for the first time.
Okay.
And I tried to keep fixing it, and eventually just had to take the entire ball of dough and just chuck in the garbage and not ever try to make bread for the next 3 years. I feel like that's what we need to do with universities. Just scrap the whole system.
Okay, so is there a reason that we can't just switch to a different metric?
No. Absolutely. Sorry, that was like, there was no. It's like, no, absolutely not. We have demonstrated time and again that
we cannot be trusted.
We can't be trusted with metrics. We take a thing, you're like, wow, this is going to be a balanced approach to evaluate people's research and their impact of their research. And then we take that and we just twist it and make people even more anxious.
Yeah.
And this metric just...
It's like almost like this, I feel like too, it almost feels like these metrics were invented or these metrics were developed with the best of intentions. But what's ended up happening is that we've decided like, we don't want to put in as much effort to actually evaluate these metrics for what they represent. We just want to like make it easier for ourselves because there's just more and more people entering this field. And so what once was like, oh yes, the number of publications matters, but there's enough of them that we can actually read them, we can actually evaluate them. Now it's just like, yeah, we'll just use a number. There's like, dude, the guy has like 15. This is a hiring committee. I'm not being paid to be here. Give me like the minimum amount of time and effort that you want from me so that I can just do this and then leave.
Yeah, I saw a post from one of academics that I follow on Twitter where it's like, now after a full day of work, I have to go home and look over 100 job applications.
Wow.
Because I'm on a hiring committee and I stopped myself. But what I wanted to reply with, imagine being one of those 100 people.
Yeah.
Like, whose livelihood depends on you begrudgingly looking through their CVs and their teaching statements and their all of this other stuff.
Yeah. And it actually reminds me so much of like the work that teachers have to put in.
Yeah.
Where it's like, yeah, you spend the whole day at school teaching and, managing your classroom. And then you go home and you have all of this paperwork and all of the work and prep work you have to do for the next day. And it's like kind of just tragic that we pay them so little. At least, in the States, there's obviously a lot of like controversy over this, right? Because teachers get paid, a sliver over minimum wage, basically.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like it's beginning that way with academics now, where, if you want the tenure track, if you want the money, right, you're going to have to work for it. And the work that you put in is going to end up being basically the same as minimum wage, right?
And it's interesting, right? Because you just said, you're going to have to work for it. And I think what a lot of people misinterpret about academia is that, like, we don't want to work. We just want to get paid to sit in our office and read books.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's the case. I think people want to work a normal amount.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're teaching a course and you care about the course, right?
Mm-hmm.
You care about your students learning, and you hold office hours and you prepare lectures and you're doing research that you care about. You're not just splicing your findings and pumping out papers. And you're also supervising graduate students. You are doing 3 full-time jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're basically getting paid lower than minimum wage per hour. What we don't want to get paid our 100 Gs for doing nothing. We want to get paid our 100 Gs for doing just 1.5 jobs. Like
just
like,
1.5.
Just 1.5, right? Like, don't even lower it to 1 job. We get it. Academia is hard. We're prepared for that. But it's getting insane.
Yeah, unreasonable. It's funny that you mentioned this idea of like laziness. Like I was replied to a tweet this morning kind of about laziness and how like people are being lazy because they're exhausted or whatever. And like I don't like the term laziness because I think laziness only exists in contrast to labor. Like we are lazy because we're not performing labor, we're not being productive. But the idea of being productive and the idea of like performing labor is socially constructed. We're like, at its core, people forget, like, we're just animals, right? Like, it's not like the Neanderthals. We're walking around being like, must research, like
must do accounting.
Like all of life was research, okay? Like if you eat this, you die. If you don't eat it, you die.
That's called a case study.
Right? But like here, we're creating these standards, and I say we as in like as a whole, we keep pushing the standard higher because we keep trying to meet the last one, right? And so collectively as academics, we are, creating this standard of labor that is increasingly unrealistic, and we're like, deemed as lazy if we don't meet it.
Yeah. I don't know. I've sent you a couple of articles about this, but in China, there is a reckoning happening with a lot of younger millennials.
Just lie down.
Yeah. They want to position themselves as the lie down generation. I'm going to do the bare minimum and I'm just going to try to sustain myself the bare minimum, but I'm not going to engage in this hyper competitive environment of work. And I feel like if we want to be treated better, we as academics have to collectively do that. We're like, no, we're not. Like, you can artificially control what the average output is. You can. If we, hypothetically, in an ideal scenario, can all be like, we're not publishing more than 4 papers a year. Like, we're just not, right? Universities can't be like, no, the threshold to get tenure track is 20.
Yeah.
Because nobody's publishing 20. But the thing is, there's always going to be that one keener. And I guarantee you it's the kid who was like in elementary school being like, teacher, you forgot to assign homework. And they're going to publish 7 papers and they're going to get the tenure track position.
Yeah, because
and as a field, we're all so paranoid that we're like, somebody's going to do that. So
Yeah,
I have
of
to
course.
publish 9, 10, 11.
But like that's exactly how like labor practices work, right? Like the union decides to go on strike, and then there's obviously the scabs who are like, well, the company's now offering like 1.5 times as much to pay me to do the work that the other people are doing. So they're going to basically, I'm going to be making more money. They're going to lose money. I just find there's so many parallels. And I've been really into this recently, but the parallels between just like labor, the laborer, and the laboree, the employer, right?
Yeah.
And there's, very much worldwide, there's this labor shortage where people are just, I think a lot of media positions that like people are just too lazy to work. There's these jobs that are like, we can't find people to work for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think instead, it's not that, people are too lazy to work. It's like people are understanding that if I'm going to be spending the majority of my life doing a job,
Mm-hmm.
right? Either like some combination of that job has to be paying me well for the work that I'm doing. So I don't feel like I'm basically, if I lose that job, I'm going to suffer for it, right? Like my
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle is going to suffer. And I have no security. It's got to be something I enjoy, right? And it's got to be something that like does, I feel like more and more does some good for the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, like I don't blame people for not wanting to take, an 18-hour job at like a McDonald's, even though it's above minimum wage, because like if they lose that job or the working conditions are really like crap, why would they want to do that?
Yeah, but it's also like a lot of the jobs that are available now, they are in the service sector, which got hit the hardest with COVID, which saw the highest COVID rates. And
Hmm.
so you're basically like, oh, people don't want to work at McDonald's because
They
like
might get COVID.
they might get COVID and we're not providing PPE
Yeah.
or like sustaining any sort of sanitation practices. How lazy.
Do
Like,
you remember at the beginning of the pandemic when COVID classic, when grocery store workers got paid extra because they were basically frontline workers, right?
yeah,
And they got paid, an extra, I don't know how much it was, but just to still work and be exposed because they was just understood that there was an inherent risk
risk.
involved. And now it's just like, nah, forget it. Everyone just go back.
And then they took it away.
Yeah, I know.
They were like, I guess now we don't care that you get COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
So anyway, all this to say, just like paralleling that with academia, and it's like kind of the same mentality. Like obviously we're not on the front lines and potentially going to get COVID, but it's more like it doesn't really matter what's happening with the world right now. It's expected that you will continue being productive, if not like just as much, if not more.
Because
Yeah,
metrics are everything.
metrics are everything, and I'm optimistic that hopefully something will like change, like a reckoning will happen. But as it stands, the people who are in the most power to change something are unfortunately the people who are in the system and see benefit from the system, right? Like I busted my ass for however long to get this position. Why am I going to go ahead and like, put that at risk now? Right?
Yeah. There has to be some solidarity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there
I
is.
mean, if we can do interdisciplinary research, guys, we can come together. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for tuning in to Sunday Service, the live stream of Grad School Confessional. Special thanks to my lovely co-host, Anna. If you missed this one live, tune in every other Sunday on twitch.tv/gradschoolconfessional at 9 a.m. PST for the next one. And you can also listen to each live stream episode on our YouTube channel or anywhere you listen to our podcast. If you haven't already, give us a follow on Twitter and share us with your social network. And until next time, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Principal Investigator, amen.